Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, December 5th, 2018. In fact, good morning to you. It is the National Day of Mourning, apparently, which coincides, well, it doesn't coincide with, it's as a result of the passing of George H.W. Bush. I guess it's his official state funeral today, and President Trump is, today is the day he finally became president, or maybe yesterday, as he was awarded 5 points to his House of Slytherin, I guess, for not vomiting on the coffin or in any way ruining the proceedings yesterday. We'll see whether he can hold it together one more day. Does he have to go to another thing today? I don't know. Or has he passed his test? But all sorts of, I don't know what, pageantry going on. I just saw on Twitter that they're having... I don't know whether it's instead of or in addition to the military funeral of 21 gun salute. They're going to have a 21 plane flyover, which I don't think I have ever heard of before, and that may account for the use of the term unprecedented when I saw it fly by, no pun intended, on Twitter. And, that's interesting. They're really going all out on this one. Here we are. Fly Navy, the Twitter account for, I guess, naval aviation. I didn't realize they had to have their own Twitter account, but pictures of the jet which will lead an unprecedented, there's your answer, 21 aircraft flyover honoring fellow naval aviator President George H.W. Bush. The jets will be over President and First Lady Bush in College Station at 16:15 CST, Central Standard Time, and, military and all that, 16:15 on Thursday. So the National Day of Mourning extended out into, they can't fly during a National Day of Mourning, I guess, and they'll fly the next day. I don't know, but okay. Well, you'll be pleased to know that Captain Kevin Proton McLaughlin, that's some nickname, they got the greatest nicknames, will fly it in the lead. So there we are. And, goodness, there's much to go with this morning. Daily Coast Radio being live now, as it is. Busy day, Bill tells us, as Greg Dworkin, Dem from Connecticut, on Twitter, of course, and Joan McCarter, who is, of course, Joan McCarter, on Twitter, as she is everywhere, help host Kagro X. That's me, David Waldman. Unpack all the news. Yes, all of it. Even the 4,392 people who got parking tickets yesterday. And I'm sorry to hear that. Sorrier still that I have to read all those names in alphabetical order, and I think that'll eat up most of the show today. Certainly will take up my time today. It is Wednesday. Greg Dworkin will be here. Joan McCarter will be here unless the morning has gotten to them and they're too distraught. There's your answer. If you thought Greg was distraught, he's not. He's here. He may also be distraught. I don't know. It's a very bipartisan thing. People are getting distraught. People who didn't believe they were going to be so emotional, I guess. See, there you are. You're already, you've fallen silent. You're without words, right, Greg?
I'm over it, but also,
okay.
I'm just so distraught. I decided to announce I'm not running for president.
Neither is George H.W. Bush. He's done with that.
Right. Neither is Michael Avenatti.
Okay. Yes. Right.
Neither is Deval Patrick.
Dead. Right. A lot of people not running, and that's the hot thing, announcing that you're not running.
I asked Abby this morning. She's not running.
Not yet.
Well, actually, she is running, but she runs after rats, so,
Oh, okay.
The rats are definitely
running. Rats, really? They're overrunning.
Yeah, she's a great rat catcher.
Well, that's what they do, I think. It's
not all dogs, but this particular one is fantastic. She's very fast, and she dislikes rats, and she chases them. So I can confidently tell you and the world today, the rats are running.
Yes. Okay. Well, they're running, but not Deval Patrick, who was thought to perhaps be in the running, although he's been pretty quiet lately.
Well, the interesting thing about Deval Patrick,
yes,
is that he's really, really, really good friends with the Obamas.
Okay.
So you have a whole bunch of Obama world,
yes,
meaning people who have worked for the Obamas over the years, and after 8 years, there's a lot of them, starting to pick sides as to what to do with 2020. There's Beto O'Rourke, who Obama himself said is a very impressive politician just in terms of raw political skill.
Okay.
And Duvall was a family friend. So do you pick sides? I mean, who's going to go with Kamala Harris? Who's going to go with Beto? Who's going to go with, Duvall? But it really doesn't matter. None of that matters. Who the Obamas want isn't really the issue. It's who the public wants.
Oh, all right. Well, you ought to ask them. Anyway,
so there's that. That's happening. But a lot was happening in terms of yesterday, which I think is news that we need to cover. Of course, stuff today as well with the service at the, National Cathedral today for George H.W. Bush. The best cartoon I saw so far, which kind of balances respect with avoiding hagiography, is one I just sent you. It has a picture of one of his comments with him next to it, cartoon drawn.
Okay,
we don't want an America that's closed to the world. What we want is a world that's open to America. And a man and a woman are looking at that, and the man says, they don't make them like that anymore. And the woman says, yeah, they do, just not as Republicans.
Well, that's true. Gets a little bit of both in there.
Yeah, and so, the whole idea is the party has left him, and there's a certain degree of public decency that he represents, which has to be, of course, not driving out or writing over the fact that he had Lee Atwater as his campaign manager and did the Willie Horton ad. I mean, they're all part and parcel of the same person. But, on the day you die and on the day of your funeral, you tend to talk about the good stuff and not about the bad stuff, and that's fine because those are 2 days, and then the rest of eternity, history and everybody else will talk about all the other stuff.
Yeah, we got a lot of time.
And it's happened, and I'm old enough to remember this. This happened when Nixon died, and you can't make it out as like, oh, only good things happen, because that's not really how any of this worked.
Yes.
So it's okay. It's fine. And as a matter of fact, the main thing that's happening with the George H.W. Bush funereal pomp, circumstance, and tradition and ceremony is it's all a contrast to Donald Trump, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's true, and
you don't even have to make a point of underlining; it's just there.
Yeah, I mean, well, he does the job himself, of course. One
of
the few jobs he's capable
what happened
of.
yesterday? We had the Flynn sentencing. Michael Flynn. We're going to talk about that. Manafort comes Friday.
Okay.
Michael Cohen next week. And the word is that unlike in the Flynn sentencing, where most of it was redacted, although we'll have a lot to say about that anyway, the word out is that a lot of what Mueller is going to do is going to be made public, especially with the Manafort one.
Okay. Yeah, not much in the way of public revelations in the Flynn one, though.
Right. A lot of it was redacted, but what we did learn is that Michael Flynn helped with more than one investigation.
Okay.
In fact, the quote was, the defendant has assisted with several ongoing investigations.
That is more
a
than
criminal
one.
investigation redacted, the special counsel's office investigation concerning any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump, redacted.
That guy. Okay.
As part of his assistance with these investigations, the defendant participated in 19 interviews with the special counsel office or attorneys from other Department of Justice offices and provided documents and communication.
All right.
Now, they mentioned that a lot of this has to do with the transition team. And may I remind you who headed the transition team? Mother?
You may. Mother may. Yes, you may. How about that?
That was Michael Flynn.
No,
that was Michael Pence.
Oh.
No, that was, what's the difference? Which one is really being looked at here? I don't know.
Oh.
We don't know. But the idea that the only reason Flynn got into trouble is he lied to Mike Pence. Maybe he didn't lie to Mike Pence.
Yeah.
Maybe Mike Pence knew what was going on all along. This is part of what we're going to find out.
Maybe all those things happened.
I'm just saying that the whole idea that Mike Pence winds up skating with no consequences whatsoever seems increasingly unlikely. That's all I'm saying.
Everybody has been talking about that. I really hope that that is true. I'm sort of waiting for, for it all to be laid out. It's not that I doubt that Mike Pence would have implicated himself and all that. I don't know how to describe it.
He may not be criminal, but if he's not criminal, given what's happening here, then he must be incredibly stupid.
Yeah.
And either way, I don't see how he continues.
Well, I'm getting an idea of how you could continue as stupid and or criminal.
Oh, you lie, cheat, and steal the way the Wisconsin and Michigan.
That's
GOP
that's one. Try that. Right? That's an approach. Yes, absolutely.
Just declare none of it matters. Rudy Giuliani, who's the brilliant lawyer and crypto cybersecurity expert,
yes,
who defends Donald Trump, at least on Twitter. And TV. I don't know if he actually does in the courtroom because I don't know if he's any good. But he had a tweet that was dated November 30th, which is still up, which is pretty funny.
Yes.
It says, Mueller filed an indictment just as the president left for G20. In July, he indicted the Russians who will never come here just because he left for Helsinki. Either could have been done earlier or later, out of control supervision, please. But the problem is he forgot a space. So when he tweeted President left for G20 in, it came out as G20.in.
Yeah.
Which looks like a website.
It is now. Right.
And so this is a several-day-old tweet, which is still up because Rudy, the cybersecurity expert, didn't realize several things. Number one, he could delete the tweet, but he doesn't know how because he's a cybersecurity expert. Secondly, he didn't realize that if you click that link,
yes,
you could go somewhere. Somebody apparently bought the link,
yep,
or at least bought the domain. And when you click on it, you get this really interesting page. I don't know if you've done that yet.
I did. I tried it.
And it says Donald J. Trump is a traitor to our country. It says in Rudy's link. And then they added, breaking, special counsel calls ex-national security advisor Michael Flynn's cooperation substantial and recommends no jail time.
Well, that's new.
It is. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, what's it mean that he didn't get jail time? It means that he must have given something very substantial to Robert Mueller.
I guess.
Because what Flynn did was pretty heinous.
Yeah, he's a spy.
Basically. David Rothkopf, who's a security expert, had this series of tweets. He says, perhaps it's because I spent so much time in my life studying national security advisors, I can't minimize my contempt for Mike Flynn, nor my outrage at his behavior, regardless of his cooperation with Mueller.
Yeah, well,
he's one of these globalist guys.
Yeah.
This is a man who has spent his life in military service and was well indoctrinated in the ideas of loyalty and service to country, which he cast aside when it suited him for a buck or out of bitterness at what he perceived as his unfair treatment by Barack Obama.
Yeah. It was not good.
He undercut norms of decency in calling for a political opponent like Hillary Clinton to be locked up. He went further, cozying up to Putin, going on Erdogan's payroll, seeking to undercut the actions of the sitting president during the transition, lying to law enforcement. He didn't lie simply to be difficult. He believed he had to cover up what he did with Russia and Turkey, serving them ahead of his service to the American people. So, it's one of the reasons why he's not so happy with it. So, beyond that, he's been a disgrace, and I trust more than a handful of people who study the history of the National Security Council or the White House will recognize just how great a disgrace he was at the center of one of the darkest moments in the history of the American presidency. We should not forget that, regardless of the terms of the deal he has struck with the Robert Mueller. That's what the tweet says.
The Robert Mueller.
But Tom Nichols, a conservative security guy, says, well, he's making amends. That's good for America and the Mueller investigation. He says, first, it's good that Flynn is not going to jail because for people incensed about the Russia scandal, I'm one of them, it would be difficult to accept that the man who called for locking up Hillary Clinton and who famously said if I did a tenth of what she did, I'd be in jail today, will escape incarceration. But vengeance isn't justice. As the sentencing memo noted, senior government leaders should be held to the highest standards, but Flynn has accepted responsibility for his unlawful conduct and was clearly cooperating. And America's already living through an agonizing slow-motion crisis of government, and it doesn't need the added spectacle of a decorated three-star general going to prison in an orange jumpsuit. Well, that's arguable.
Sure.
But it says, first, there's that. Second, we should realize that the redactions, and I read some of them to you, are a positive sign in themselves. Mueller and other Justice Department agencies are holding back details that pertain to multiple investigations underway to multiple offices. This means Mueller's found important matters pertaining not only to Russia and possible collusion, but that he's uncovered criminal matters that need referral to other agencies, all of which will continue the work even if Mueller's fired tomorrow.
Okay.
The idea that Mueller's out of gas, of course, was the canned response waiting at the White House, but Rudy's rambling wish-casting isn't remotely close to what happened. And then third, Mueller's left clues about where he might go. He provided first-hand information about the content and context of interactions between that transition team. Who was that again, Mother? And Russian government officials, the report says, with further details redacted. But this likely means Mueller believes Flynn and could be using Flynn's statements to check the veracity of others in the White House. And this is different than the ongoing tug-of-war with Manafort, the careful reeling in of Roger Stone. And as a sidebar there, Roger Stone apparently has told the Senate investigating committee, is that the Intelligence Committee?
Well, they have a committee.
I think, anyway, they asked them, somebody on the Senate side asked them to testify, and he said, I'm pleading the fifth.
Well, I thought that was something that criminals did, according to what's-his-face, the president guy.
So I saw a very funny tweet that someone said, it's along the lines of, what, I'm pleading the fifth. Do you expect me to talk? And the answer was, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Yeah, well, he loves what he thinks is the dapper dress-up thing. He just looks like a weirdo, but...
Well, the other side of it, though, and this is case law, as brought out by Benjamin Wittes. Again, I am not a lawyer, and I don't pretend to be one. But the fifth applies to testimony. It don't apply to documents. Right?
That's true.
Oh, my fingerprints I left at the scene of the bank heist? I'm pleading the fifth on those.
Yeah, all 5 of them.
So he's going to have to turn over the documents, even if he decides not to talk in person.
Yes.
Because documents aren't coerced.
Right. That's true, too. And yeah, you don't have to...
Who says so? The Supreme Court. Don't argue with me. Argue with them.
Right. I mean, you can fight about whether or not the documents are privileged, for instance, but...
Yeah, and that's about the only thing.
You can't erase them by pleading the fifth.
Yeah, and how is it going to be privileged when, he didn't really have any formal... I mean, the whole idea was to fire him so he can go off and do this stuff with plausible deniability. But then again, if you do that, no privilege. That's one of those, if you are caught, this tape self-destructs, Yeah. We will deny we never knew anything about you. So that's all interesting, and it's all out there. And I think it's all part of the bigger picture. And so we get to see this play out. And it's a reminder that Robert Mueller has been doing his work. And just because he was quiet during the election doesn't mean any of this, is going to go away. Oh, by the way, since we're talking about spy stuff, this would be a good time to bring this up. I see this story in Salon by Amanda Marcotte. NRA on the ropes. In fact, the entire gun industry saw a sign of weakness, flagging gun sales. The once powerful industry finally weakening post-Parkland because they can't raise money and they're not selling a lot of guns.
And the Russians are under the microscope.
Well, that's the other thing.
Oh.
So the Daily Beast has this piece called Feds Target Maria Butina's GOP boyfriend as a foreign agent.
Ah, yes.
Maria Butina, she did stuff with the NRA, you may recall. That's the tie-in there. Paul Erickson served as accused Kremlin spy Maria Butina's guide as she penetrated the American conservative movement. Now he's under investigation as a Russian agent, too.
Yeah. That was dumb.
Yeah. Paul Erickson, longtime Republican Politico whose Russian girlfriend is in jail on charges she acted as a covert foreign agent, has been informed that he may face similar accusations. The Daily Beast reviewed a so-called target letter that federal investigators sent to Erickson's lawyer, which said they're considering bringing charges against him under Section 951 of the U.S. Code, the law barring people from secretly acting as agents of foreign governments.
Oh, that's a good section.
It's a conspiracy charge, too. So there may not be collusion, but there may be conspiracy.
Espionage. Fun.
You can do espionage and get convicted. And you can do conspiracy and get convicted. And just because there's no crime against collusion doesn't mean you're off the hook there.
No. Espionage is that's some hook, by the way. what they can do to you.
If prosecutors bring the charges named in the letter, Erickson would be the first American. It's always nice to be first, isn't it?
Yes.
The first American charged under a statute Justice Department lawyers describe as espionage light.
Oh, well, good. Punishable by
Charging an
execution
American under
light.
951 in the context of the Russia investigation is especially serious, he's quoting here, because that statute is generally reserved for espionage-like cases, such as intelligence gathering on behalf of a foreign government, said Ryan Goodman, a former Defense Department attorney who now teaches at the New York University School of Law and Finessemanship.
Okay.
Right? Because, I mean, you really got to see the subtleties here. Essentially, what it would say is that an American was acting to advance the interest of a foreign power contrary to the interest of the USA, said Renato Mariotti, a former federal prosecutor and a great follow on Twitter, by the way.
Yes. Well, okay. It's a little bit of espionage, a little bit of treason.
Right. Justice
Nice.
Department investigators aren't the only ones interested in Erickson. Staff on the Senate Intelligence Committee who are probing Russian meddling in the 2016 American elections have also asked to speak with him, but a lawyer for Erickson told him he'd plead the fifth.
Oh, he will too, huh? Okay.
Yeah. Investigators will not force Erickson to appear, just to take the fifth. William Hurt, who's representing Erickson on the Senate Intelligence Committee matter, declined to comment. A reminder, but they can also ask for documents.
Right. So if there are any documents he left behind saying Maria, was it Maria or Marina? I can't remember which was her.
Maria.
Maria, I can't get to that espionage until Thursday, but remind me, please, to spy on America for Russia on Wednesday night. That would be bad news. And there might be such a letter.
I don't know if we'll do this before or after the break. We're going to talk a little bit about North Carolina 9 and what's happening there in the increasingly obvious fraud situation that stole an election.
Right.
But if you just step back and look at the bigger picture here, what I said about George H.W. Bush turns out to be true. This is not the Republican Party you remember.
No.
You have the Republican Party with NRA financing, which, by the way, comes from Russia. You have the Republican Party, which loses elections but then tries to ensure minority rule regardless, like in Michigan and in Wisconsin, to a certain extent in Ohio as well. You have the Republican Party that enlists white supremacists.
Yes, that's bad.
In the, like Stephen Miller, who's still there, and rejects everything about what George H.W. Bush stood for in regard to government service. It's really a remarkable mix of where the party is. And, it's hard to avoid. Francis Wilkinson has a piece about this. He basically says, looking at the whole big picture here, but especially in North Carolina, the election fraud is coming from inside the GOP.
Oh, I knew it. See, yeah, they call the police on everybody's election fraud, and turns out that they were doing it the whole time.
The daily crisis, he says, that is Trump's presidency often obscures the extended crisis that is the Republican Party. For example, he said, when I asked Speaker Ryan's office why he was joining in the efforts of his party's least credible members, including President Donald Trump, to undermine confidence in the integrity of the vote, remember Ryan said something about how could it happen in California that, like, we win the election and then days later we lose.
Yeah.
Without a shred of evidence that something's awry, a spokesman pointed me to a previous statement delivered to the Hill newspaper saying Ryan, quote, did not and does not dispute the results of the election. He was specifically talking about California and Orange County.
Right.
And Wilkinson writes, it's good to know that when the Speaker of the House pours kerosene on conspiracy theories, he's not rooting for the public to burn down.
Sure.
So, again, bigger picture here. One party really has completely and totally gone off the rails. And you know what? They got their head handed to them in this election. Dave Wasserman has, he's continuing to track this. And he points out that on the day of the election in November, the Democratic lead in the popular vote for the House was 5.3%. It's now up to 8.5% with 9.6 million votes.
Oh.
And the votes to count in California.
I see.
Hit 10 million.
Oh, that's all right. So that's the actual results. Has anybody polled lately? Like, I guess they stopped polling. I wonder.
Yeah.
No,
those guys are on vacation. They just were up every night for like 6 months, and they're out on the beach somewhere.
Windsurfing or something, and
Okay. So the fact of the matter is that the public has really started to reject the Republican Party. And we can keep saying, well, how come Trump voters still don't? Well, there's a bunch of reasons for that. But Trump voters are not Trump loyalists. The Trump loyalists are a very, very small portion of the party. They are evangelicals who can't give up power. They are only 14% of the population, according to PRRI polls. But the hold your nose and vote for Trump anyway people are beginning to break away. And it's looking less and less like he's got any shot of getting reelected in 2020, to the point where people are now talking about the other way. A whole series of Nate Silver tweets saying, look, is it better to just leave him and have the Democrats run against somebody that damaged? Or do you pull him and increase Republican chances? And, that's a relevant thing to talk about, and makes at least as much sense as, oh, well, he's the incumbent and he's got a better than even chance of being reelected in 2020. No, he does not.
Well, he's unusual, and this is not normal, and that's one of the. I guess that's the flip side of the this is not normal analysis. One of the normal
we fully understand and get to fully understand exactly what Russia did in 2016, maybe that'll get pointed back to political gravity and where it really belongs. And as the break comes up,
yes.
Hear the music as I speak. We're going to talk a little bit about North Carolina 9 and what's going on there, but a reminder to our listeners and to myself,
yes,
who barely squeaked out a win, isn't just Mark Harris, Republican. It's the Reverend Mark Harris, the pumping a Neanderthal, home and not careers.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still with us is Greg Dworkin. As we exited toward the break, you were reminding us of Mark Harris's record as then pastor of Charlotte's First Baptist Church. I wonder what. So this was back a ways. They have 2013 quotes of his. Not unusual among ultra right wing evangelical pastors, of course, but your basic women have a biblical role to play, and working outside the home can interfere with that. God's plan, etc., etc. I don't know what it was that drove him from his ministry and into politics, but maybe we'll find out one day. Interesting. Okay, well, I mean, sort of run-of-the-mill as evangelicals go. But
well, yes, but just a reminder that he is a very right-wing evangelical. Now, there is, as you probably know, an ex-evangelical movement from people who were indoctrinated in this sort of thing, grew up and left, and see it as a form of brainwashing. And Christopher Stroop is one of the leaders of that movement, who you can find on Twitter, who's just a fascinating read. He also happens to be, in his other life, a Russia expert. So it's interesting to read about, the juxtaposition of that. But that's who Mark Harris is, and he's the guy that beat Robert Pittenger in the primary, which was then certified, and then he won this recent November election against Dan the Man McCready, the Democrat, by 900 some odd votes with lots and lots and lots of questions here about whether or not this was truly anything close to being legal and above board. And actually, there's a second woman, Cheryl Kinlaw, that Joe Bruno from WSOC, the Charlotte TV station, reports, tells me she was paid $100 by McCrae Dowless, that's the guy in the center of all this you were reading about on Monday, I remember, to pick up absentee ballots. She said she never thought it was illegal because Dowless had been doing this for years.
Right.
And besides, she needed extra money for Christmas presents. And basically, you pick up the ballots, you hand them over to him. They're not sealed, and it's not her problem as to what happens with it. And it turns out a lot of the witnesses on the various and sundry ballots are extended McCrae Dowless family members.
Yes.
Which is pretty wacky.
Apparently, some of them packed 5 at a time into one-bedroom apartments.
Right. So Dave Wasserman from Cook Report says, no longer any reasonable doubt as to absentee fraud perpetrated by pro-Harris forces in NCO9 in both primary and general. Question is, how widespread and who knew? And, of course, what is the remedy for all of this? And the problem is that the primary has been certified, but the general has not.
Right.
That affects what North Carolina does, but it doesn't affect what the House does. And Steny Hoyer already came out and said, we're not seating this guy.
Yeah, well, they can't. I mean, at this point, I think they literally can't. It's a good thing for him to say, and it's the proper treatment of the case, but I don't think that it would even be possible to seat him, even if they wanted to. If North Carolina doesn't certify his election, there's no documents to enter onto the record to prove that he's entitled to the seat. It's an easy thing to decide, if I don't get your credentials, I'm not seating you. But
now,
good.
I saw yesterday that North Carolina was trying to pass a lame duck, just how Michigan and Wisconsin are trying to steal power from the government and the attorney general after the Republicans lost the general election, but the Republican legislature is trying to steal power from them. The North Carolina legislator introduced yesterday, and I don't have the details on this, something about interfering with the investigation that North Carolina would do to make sure that Harris wins and then he goes to Congress.
Oh.
So if they do that, the House is going to be obligated to not seat him.
Yes.
In my view, morally. I mean, technically, in terms of procedure, they have that absolute ability. But, if North Carolina refuses to do anything about it, and it's unclear whether that, in fact, is the result. I still don't have the details of how that bill would do that, but it's something about changing who the state board of elections is and who they report to and how they do all their stuff.
Yeah. I didn't know that it would. I mean, I guess you might have surmised that it would impact this, but this particular situation. But as I understand it, the bill that they were introducing with regard to the chairmanship of the state board of elections was they were trying to disguise it as sort of content neutral or politically neutral way of ends up guaranteeing that Republicans would hold the chairmanship of the state board of elections during every election year. But for fairness, they'll rotate in between Democrats and Republicans. 1 year Democrat, 1 year Republicans. It's just that in even-numbered years, which may or may not have elections in them, I don't really know, during even-numbered years, the party with the second highest number of registrants in the state, and I don't know, it just happens to be the Republican Party, would be in charge of holding the chairmanship of the State Board of Elections, whereas during odd-numbered years, the majority registration party, the Democrats, would hold the chair. And, it's not our fault. I didn't know when I did this that all elections would be held during the even-numbered years when the second highest number of registrants would that party would win the chairmanship. It just happened to work out that way. I don't know. So I thought that was a pretty interesting and sneaky thing. I didn't know if it would impact this outcome, although this outcome may be impacted already by the fact that who cares? We might as well let them do this, because even when Democrats do hold the chairmanship during an election year, they resign it. as soon as there's a controversy. The State Board of Elections was currently chaired by a Democrat when they discovered this North Carolina '09 problem. And so that it didn't look like a partisan effort to unseat a Republican who had cheated horribly, the guy says, I'm going to resign. And I've never really been clear on why he did that.
I'm not sure, but Mark Elias, the Democratic lawyer who does election stuff, tweeted yesterday, urgent, the North Carolina GOP now has a bill that appears aimed at obstructing a fair investigation of the NC9 election fraud scandal. If this must not pass. If it does, Democrats should announce they won't see Harris, period.
Okay.
And then gives a copy of the bill, but it's long, and I didn't go through it, and I didn't understand it anyway.
Well, let's see.
All right, so I just don't really get where the issue is, but clearly there is one.
Yeah.
People perceive.
Well, okay. I'll look around for it. So Mark Elias, I'll take a look.
Well, I'll give that to you.
Okay. Well, then I will use my eyes to read it.
Yeah, so now you're obligated to read it. Anyway, so the fact of the matter is that the more we learn, the more dicey the whole procedure needs to be. But the fact that it was, what do you do in terms of remedy? Because if you certified the primary, does that let Pittenger back in? And if you don't certify the primary, does that mean that Harris, who everybody agrees, not based on his religious preferences, but on his political preferences, is a slime ball? Do you allow him to run?
I don't know. I mean, allow? Yeah, I guess.
I mean, the guy looks like he's on his way to jail for being involved in this.
He's not there
How
yet.
do we know he's involved in this? The Republican Party paid for the company that hired the fellow whose family collected all these absentee ballots. There's a direct connection. And Harris used it to win the primary. And so there's a connection here. It said, do you allow him to run? Well, North Carolina GOP says, what's the problem? But
at least part of it.
What does the House say? What does the House of Representatives in D.C. say? Because they're the ones that are going to be adjudicating this, I would think.
Yes. Well, if it doesn't come out right, they'll have a second go at it. That's for sure.
I understand the idea that the House would step back and say, when we didn't know a whole lot about what was going on, it just looked fishy.
Yeah.
That you would say, this looks fishy, so you guys better do another election. But what do you do when you know that one of the guys was just caught cheating? Do you let that guy into the election? This is the part I'm murky about in terms of what the House of Representatives can do. Can they just say, we're not seating him, period? I don't care whether you have another election. You better pick somebody else. Or do they demand another election not including this guy? Is that within their purview?
I don't know if that they'd be able to dictate the terms of ballot access to a state, but they could, of course, with a majority, you can do an awful lot, including, I don't care what you do down there in North Carolina, choose it any way you want, but no matter what happens, if you send us Mark Harris, this seat remains vacant.
I mean, we have talked on the show a lot about the power of the gavel. If you really want to push it, can they push it that far? And say, it's not like we're telling you what to do. We're just telling you we're not seating this guy.
Well, you can push it there. Now, whether or not that stands up in court in the end is another question. But I remind you that a Congress only lasts 2 years. I can make this problem last longer than this term of Congress in court. So there's no seat here for Mark Harris. Do what you want to do. Handle it the way you want to handle it. But if you send them back to us, your seat, NC 09 has no representation for the 116th Congress. And by the time you win the case in court mandating, if that were to happen, that we seat a duly elected Mark Harris, it'll be the 117th Congress and he'll have to run all over again.
And by the way, so he'll have to run all over again. And when he does run all over again, by then he may be a convicted felon.
Right. Certainly could be the case, and then people would.
Of course, that doesn't exclude you from Congress, right?
Not by itself. Although then at that point they may expel you. But who knows?
Yes. But who knows?
Republicans have to vote on that.
Right. So it gets to be pretty complicated. But I'm looking at this whole big picture and thinking a little bit down the road, and I don't understand how Mark Harris thinks he's going to Congress. He ain't. I
don't know what else he would do with his day. I mean, I guess he probably says I might as well go to Washington and hope that people think I'm innocent. But
I'll go preach. Might as well.
Could do that. That's always open.
Anything else, and I got to make a living. They're not paying me.
Even conviction doesn't necessarily stop you from preaching. Go ahead.
Right, but you're not going to draw a salary, and you don't have congressional offices you can live in.
Right. You just have to take it from your congregation.
So
they don't mind. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think all of that is pretty fascinating, and I think that watching that North Carolina stuff play out as background to watching what plays out in Wisconsin and Michigan and throughout the disappearing Paul Ryan's House majority. Yeah, it's just all pretty fascinating because, the Republican Party is full of rot, and the more that they adhere to Trump, the harder, they're going to fall when Trump goes down, because I think he's going to wind up taking the whole party with him.
Well,
because they chose it that way.
It was their idea.
Anyway, that's my sermon for today. So this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman. Kagro in the morning. Is Joan going to be on later?
I hope so. I have no reason to believe that she won't be. How's that?
Say hi.
Yeah, I will do that. That's the extent of the planning for her segment. I just leave the door open and say, I'll say hi for you.
Wouldn't it be fun, though, if it turned out that Trump going down took the NRA with him?
Yes, that would be
took
great.
The Republican Party with him?
Wouldn't that be
Rick
nice?
Wilson wrote this book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. He's got a point.
Yeah, well, those keep your hands on those then. By all means, take everybody with you, and I think he'll insist on that too. There's something about Donald Trump that I don't know that we've put our finger on it yet, because he has.
I don't know, but take Mr.
Bonsall
Bonsall with you.
Yeah, but I do think he has a tendency to insist that if he's going to go down, everybody around him go down too. And
good, take Jared.
I'm excited to see that happen.
It was pretty remarkable that the Senate said we don't believe anything you told us about.
Oh yes.
Mohammed bin Salman, and we don't believe it, and we're going to do something about it. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. We'll see. But it's
yes, Donald.
It's the beginning of rebellion on the Republican ranks.
Well, I hope so. It would be nice if that were the case. So far, I see that they're disagreeing with him. Right, they're disagreeing. I don't know what they're going to do about it, and I'm afraid that it'll eventually come down to. I mean, I was reading it and it is dissent against Trump's stated position, but I don't find it difficult to believe that, say, Lindsey Graham would say, "Oh, I absolutely believe that Mohammed bin Salman was behind the murder," unlike what President Trump says. But President Trump wasn't behind it, so what do I care?
Well, Lindsey Graham said there was a smoking bone saw.
Yes.
And the question's going to be, do they cut off funds for the Yemen war? And do they start interfering, which is to say advising and consenting on foreign policy? Right.
Well, that's true. That they can do, and that may or may not upset Trump to some extent. And
on the House side, funds
fixable.
Because the House does money.
They're really, they really are asserting themselves, at least on Yemen lately, and that's a good thing. And
it's got to start somewhere,
I guess so. I mean, I'll take it. Any progress we can get, any attention that we can get among in Republican officialdom in particular for the war in Yemen, and I say officialdom because Rand Paul will say, "See, all Republicans have been paying attention," because I have.
Rand Paul was really pissed that he wasn't included in that briefing. But, again, I do have to go. So what'll happen is that Joan will tell you what Congress can and cannot do, and David will tell you how they do it.
Okay.
So I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. I know a lot of today is going to be devoted to services for George H.W. Bush. And again, that'll keep Trump more or less out of the headlines, which has been a good thing for him. I see that the NBC News is saying, "Oh, look how presidential Donald Trump is doing. He's keeping his mouth shut." That's about, there's no pivot. Nobody's expecting a pivot anymore, but about, it's the best I can say about it. That's not even true, but because he's still tweeting about Mueller and Mike Flynn and all that other stuff.
Yeah,
but we'll see, and we'll talk again tomorrow.
Okay. We'll do that. Although, again, if you're going to be here now and tomorrow, you might as well just stay.
I suppose.
All the way through. All right. Well, bring a bag next time.
If I'm not here, who's going to interrupt you?
Joan
is too nice. She doesn't interrupt you enough.
Well, she's getting better at that, I must say. It's good. It's proper.
And for those of you listeners who don't know, I've been interrupting David like this for I don't know, 20 years.
Right. And as long as you've interrupted me then and now, you might as well just keep going. I'm lobbying for this.
Take care.
Okay. Well, that's it. I'll believe it. He interrupted me just to say he was no longer going to interrupt me. It's amazing. All right. Well, yes, I do expect to hear from Joan later on today, and we'll catch up on a bunch of all. You know what I should do is because there's still some time, I think, before, unless she wants to rush in and take up the mantle right away, which I'm entirely open to, but it's usually a busy time of the morning. I could see if we could squeeze in the exciting conclusion of what the hell is wrong with Mohammed bin Salman and the rest of the House of Saud, and figure out whether at the conclusion of the final, I think the exciting conclusion, we'll see if we can fit it all in, of the Washington Post's piece on the Khashoggi killing and how it had roots in a cutthroat Saudi family feud. We got down to what I believe is the last section of the piece. And yeah, okay, just scrolling, I can see that I think we might be actually able to take care of this. The last section of the piece and sub-headlined Brutal Paranoia. And I think this is where we sort of arrive at the conclusion that there's really nothing in particular, logically speaking, behind the killing of Khashoggi. So far, we've learned all about the weird feuding behind the scenes and behind the throne, essentially. Well, really, I guess, over in Saudi Arabia. But so far, nothing in the way of revelation that resonates with a sensible person that tells us, oh, well, now I understand why they finally had to do it. It's just so far, and I think this conclusion, even this last section, will just bear it out. There is a feud going on, but it's unclear what Khashoggi had to do with any of it. And I think the only conclusion that you can draw is there are varying degrees of crazy in competition with one another for the throne and the power behind the throne in Saudi Arabia. And Mohammed bin Salman is the most dangerous and murderous, possibly, of the various brands of crazy, though I don't necessarily say that it's beyond any of the other factions to have murdered anybody, Khashoggi or anybody else for that matter. It's still unclear to me what it was about Khashoggi that demanded his murder. He was a dissident, yes, but I don't think he posed any particular danger to Saudi Arabia as a sovereign entity, nor did he pose any serious danger, it seemed, to Mohammed bin Salman assuming power. The biggest danger, the biggest obstacle to his assuming power at this point is that everybody is finding out that he murdered Jamal Khashoggi, which seems like a huge public relations mistake, which is a terrible way of describing an actual murder. Anyway, the conclusion here, brutal paranoia. We'll see if this clears up anything. What's haunting, our writers say here, about this tale of family rivalry is that it helped breed the paranoia that led to Khashoggi's death. And just to remind everybody here, it's David Ignatius's piece that we're reading here in the Washington Post. Why didn't anyone stop this deadly chain of error? Is that what it was? Error? The failed rendition of Obaid from China, remember this story yesterday, is eerily similar to the Khashoggi killing in Istanbul, which is to say that this is a standard operating procedure for whoever's doing this. Big question mark. In each case, the Saudis wanted to silence a meddlesome critic. Obaid was a little more dangerous, I think, to the succession of power than Khashoggi was. But okay, when initial contacts failed, they attempted an illegal covert operation, each time under the direction of the Deputy Chief of Intelligence, who had close links with the royal court. The Deputy Intelligence Chief each time proved to be the fall guy. No hard evidence has emerged in either case documenting MBS's role. And I imagine they would do everything they could to avoid that there. Both operations appear to have been organized by a special cell within the royal court, where Khatani was a key supervisor, not by the Saudi intelligence services. That's reassuring somehow, I'll add, to U.S. officials who see as potential stabilizing forces Humaydan and his colleague Abdulaziz al-Hawairini. Hawairini, like how ironic, right? Abdulaziz al-Hawairini. It's Hawairini. He's the head of the internal security agency known as the Mabahith. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they won't come after me because they're internal, you see. Anyway, perhaps the biggest difference between the two cases is that Obaid is alive in a suburb of Geneva, while Khashoggi is dead and dismembered, the whereabouts of his body unknown. That is a big difference. The Saudi public prosecutor has arrested 18 Saudis in the case, including Maher Mutreb, a former intelligence officer and sometime bodyguard for MBS, who Saudi officials have charged was the leader of the team that murdered Khashoggi. Khatani and Asiri have both been fired from their jobs, and Khatani is among 17 Saudis sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury for their alleged roles in the Post journalist's death. The Treasury statement said that Khatani was part of the planning and execution of the operation, and that Mutreb coordinated and executed it. That's not a great deal of difference. One was part of the planning and execution, and the other was a person who coordinated and executed it. Okay. Planning is sort of like a synonym for coordinated, and execution is just the same word as executed. So, okay. Just a different form, right? Every Saudi watcher I spoke with, Ignatius again, believes that MBS is likely to survive in power, which is amazing, despite the global outrage over Khashoggi's killing. The closest thing to a, quote, smoking gun in the Khashoggi case is that Khatani is said to have exchanged multiple messages with MBS in the 2 days surrounding the journalist's murder, but unless those messages are disclosed, it might be impossible to prove a connection. The brutal paranoia of MBS's royal court in Riyadh recalls Baghdad in the days of Saddam Hussein. The spotlight cast by Khashoggi's killing gives Saudi Arabia, I'll put it that way, and the United States a last chance to check a slide toward Hussein-like despotism from overwhelming the region. The House of Saud rules with a sometimes bloody hand. The United States, as the kingdom's key ally, has an obligation to calm this family feud before it does any more damage to Saudi Arabia and the world. It's a very dissatisfying ending. Not that it was David Ignatius's obligation to solve the mystery or even really provide some sort of reason where there may not be any. What I was looking for out of the whole exploration, in addition to let me find out who are the players and what are the factions and who's doing what to whom and how brutal does it get, so that you have a pretty good idea of how power, or you get a better idea than you're able to otherwise, I guess, from outside of this land of mystery here, of how power transfers and what people are willing to do for it. And you're reminded every once in a while, like he said, Game of Thrones style, that absolute monarchy, absolute power inside of Saudi Arabia is something that, can in fact turn on a dime if you can convince the right people to execute the person who previously exercised absolute power. Well, then absolute power is going to transfer. And just being the king itself, or related to the king himself, doesn't necessarily save you in most of these instances. And a dead prince is one to whom no one owes any more loyalty. And, once the deed is done, though it may upset the balance of power there, I guess people don't care a great deal after all. And I suppose the average Saudi Arabian citizen probably doesn't care much either and has no choice in who the king is or who his successor may be. And it's all the same to them. But all I learned was that MBS is so far appears to be the most vicious of the various people contending for the throne. And I did learn along the way that I guess there's really nothing inevitable to his succession to rule. So I'm a little bit disappointed in what we learned in the last couple paragraphs here, that it doesn't look like anything stands in the way of his acceding to power. It's true that I guess there's nothing in the way of hard and fast evidence that proves a definite connection, but everybody believes it. And I saw yesterday, I forget who was the wacky member of Congress, a Republican, on one of the interview shows, and basically, I mean, he misstated what his thesis was, that there was no big deal with the Khashoggi murder because journalists disappear around the world all the time. And that is true, but he misstated it and said they disappear all over the country, which is a little scary. But that's not true. And he meant around the world. That doesn't excuse any of this, though, of course. But he was pointing out, I think the real point he was trying to make was, well, look, they're a key ally in the Middle East, et cetera, and that's distasteful and gross, but I guess in realpolitik terms, it's true. And he said, all right, well, we have to have a relationship with Saudi Arabia. I say Saudi, he says Saudi Arabia, no matter what. And that also may, in fact, in realpolitik terms, be true. But one thing I want to remind everybody, one thing I took away from this article and all the articles we've read about Saudi Arabia and how it works there, he's the crown prince now. But these guys have princes falling out of their butts over there. I mean, you can't swing, you literally can't swing you shouldn't swing a dead cat in Saudi Arabia without hitting a prince of some kind. The succession rules, I don't know how hard and fast the rules really are there, but it seems to me, reading through this article, and I know it was confusing because we spaced it out over 3 days and 2 weeks, it doesn't sound, I mean, we learned that the crown prince designation changed like 3 times in the last couple of years. They can change it if they want to. We have to have a relationship with that country, but not necessarily with Mohammed bin Salman. Get me another prince, please. I'm sure you can do it. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A late re-entry here, just reviewing the comments that we've had during the past hour or so. And Bill had commented early on in our opening segment that it was probably a good time, and I guess it's still a good time, we'll have to say, to remind the world that, given the George H.W. funeral going on today, that Donald Trump claimed to have lost, quote, many friends on 9/11, the attack, of course, on New York City. I doubt that he had any friends in the Pentagon or anywhere else, but that he claimed to have lost many friends and yet went to no funerals. Is that the case? I mean, I don't know that we would have watched that closely, whether he did, but I think the tabloids keep a pretty close eye on the guy even back then. And, of course, if he were going to any funerals, he would be sure to publicize it and get brownie points for it, and I guess he didn't. And so he either had no friends or lost none during that time, or in fact did lose some but didn't care enough to go to their funerals because he's kind of a lazy guy. That could easily be the case. Let's see. All right, Michael Musson had a comment regarding the North Carolina case. He's got a Bible quote, Proverbs 16:33, and I can't tell you what's in there, but what follows in the tweet here says, "Make your motions and cast your votes, but God has the final say unless you can collect the absentee votes for your opponent and cast them out. Then you should totally do it." Okay, that's probably a paraphrasing of what's actually there, my guess. Anyway. Yes, so we have finally finished up that piece about the Saudi family blood feud that ended up in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. It's still, I mean, you know what? Honestly, I still haven't read most of what, or anything. Maybe I've not even read, how do I know? I can't remember whether I've ever read anything Jamal Khashoggi ever wrote. You would think I would have, given the interest that I have in trying to unravel Saudi Arabia. But basically, I can't imagine him doing anything that would have stood in the way of Mohammed bin Salman's ascension at the very least, to power, as critical of him as he may have been. And maybe he was blowing up the myth of the reformer around him. And by the way, I mean, what kind of damage has been done to that? If now the conclusion of the Ignatius piece is that what you're getting is a lunatic dictator who will make Saudi Arabia more like Iraq, which, you know, we seem to have spent an awful lot of time and money and treasure and blood in trying to undo. And for all the running around saying that Saudi Arabia is a key ally in the region, wouldn't it be something to hand it over to a second Saddam Hussein? Now, watch out, David Ignatius. You've probably done more damage to MBS's ability to hold on to legitimacy in his power here in the Western countries, or at least the English-speaking Western countries. Well, they're all pretty good at English, actually. We're just terrible at their languages. But, that's probably the biggest worry for him, is that he would be seen as illegitimate in the West. And he ought to be seen that way. And I think that would probably be the point of trying to hang Khashoggi's murder on him, if nothing else. But, the plea from the foreign policy crowd that says, look, the reality is we simply must maintain our relationship, or some kind of alliance type relationship with Saudi Arabia. I could accept that. I'm not 100% certain that it absolutely has to be Saudi Arabia that we have this relationship with, but okay. But again, it could be with a different crown prince, a different king. There's no particular reason why the United States needs to have it be Mohammed bin Salman, unless he really was the visionary reformer that he was trying to portray himself as being. And however, if he is both a visionary reformer and a brutal dictator and wanton murderer, then that might not be worth the trade, because I'm pretty sure Saddam Hussein saw himself that way too. On the other hand, the United States is ready, willing, and able to make that mistake over and over and over again, both in the Middle East and, let's say, all throughout Central and South America. So, I guess it fits a pattern, to say the least. Okay, well, that helps us put in context that massive story that David Ignatius put together, and we can move on, I think, from there to some of the other things and update you on this news. Yesterday was set to become the start of the Jeffrey Epstein trial, or the latest trial of involving Jeffrey Epstein, down in Florida. And it only sort of centered on his actual sexual abuse of teenage girls. As it turns out, it was billed as the first opportunity in a courtroom that many of his victims would have, and in many cases, decades later, after their initial abuse, their first opportunity to testify in court about what he did to them. That opportunity is not coming any longer in connection with this case, and the trial won't begin. Instead, as I see reported here in The Hill and reported in a number of places, accusers won't testify for now against wealthy sex offender, that's Jeffrey Epstein, according to a report. The write-up here by Chris Mills Rodrigo in The Hill, and I guess he puts it pretty succinctly here, relying on Associated Press reports. None of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers will be able to testify against the wealthy sex offender for now under a last-minute settlement reached Tuesday, the Associated Press reported. Epstein, who pleaded guilty in 2008 to state sex charges, served just over a year in jail and became a registered sex offender. He's accused of sexually abusing dozens of teenage girls. He was in court Tuesday for a civil lawsuit against Bradley Edwards. That's how we got there. A former state prosecutor who represents some of his accusers, according to the AP. Epstein had claimed Edwards committed legal misdeeds in representing several accusers in a case that would have allowed several of them to testify for the first time, the news service noted. Epstein's case was pushed into the national spotlight after a Miami Herald investigation revealed that he avoided a possible life term during the initial case in 2008 through a secret deal with federal prosecutors led by now Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta. Perhaps a little bit more on that in just a moment. Under the agreement, though, Epstein was allowed to leave jail during his 13-month sentence for 12-hour periods, 6 days a week, to commute to his private office for work. You heard all about that from the Miami Herald. The agreement was kept secret from his accusers. A second lawsuit, which is still pending, seeks to invalidate the non-prosecution agreement to send Epstein to federal prison. And I'd be glad to see that one go forward as well. We'll see where they get to. But they had a settlement, and I don't know what the terms are, and they probably won't tell us what the terms are. But essentially, Epstein apologized to Edwards. He apologized for saying that he committed legal misdeeds in his representing of several of the accusers. And that was that. He had nothing to say about the actual abuse. And Edwards is happy. He gets, I guess, what he wanted out of the case, except I sort of thought that all of this was engineered to allow for the testimony of the victims, and apparently he doesn't actually care about that, and they're going to have to speak on their own elsewhere in their own case. So there you have it. When your interests don't align 100%, you sometimes lose out in other people's settlements. And as I said, there was going to be more about this thing. I did see an interesting tweet this morning. Let me see if I can roll back and find that it's not even all that far back in my timeline. But where is this one? Ah, yes, here we are. I saw, I don't know originally who was tweeting this around, but they were giving credit somehow to a person by the name of Penny Nance, about whom I know nothing. CEO of CWA, that's, I think, Concerned Women of America. That means she is a prominent woman conservative activist of the, generally speaking, anti-feminist stripe, essentially. And so the Concerned Women of America, they're always so concerned about things. Well, she was being given credit, I guess, for speaking out and saying, boy, we really ought to do something about this, and that Secretary Acosta, who, his role in all of this, should resign. And I mean, that's good. He should resign. It's good that Penny Nance, I guess, thinks that he should resign. I wouldn't get too carried away, though. Her tweet actually it says that Jonathan Swan of Axios here breaks another important story. And then, thank you, Ben Sass, did we ever learn how to pronounce that senator's name, for pursuing truth. That brave pursuit of truth. I guess he's also upset with Secretary Acosta, though I guess not yet calling for his resignation, but maybe hinting that he will. So she's out here to cheer for Ben Sass for also saying there might be something to this Acosta deal. She goes on to say, if Miami Herald reports had come out before, I believe Donald Trump would not have nominated Acosta. And that's where you're wrong, dear. Labor trafficking is often conjoined with sex trafficking. That is also true. I believe, as a result, I guess, Secretary Acosta should resign. And wow, that's dumb, because as many people responded, everybody knew. The Miami Herald wasn't the first to dig up this story. They dug up a lot of extra detail, and they came out with a perfectly timed expose of all of it. But the reality is, yeah, it was known. Absolutely. You knew it. We read it. I knew it because I read it in the newspaper. Ben Sass would have known it because he would have read it in the Washington Post. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's that small town newspaper regularly published in your place of business there, Senator. And yeah, the Washington Post in, March of 2017, when Acosta was merely the nominee for the Labor post, ran the headline, Labor nominee Acosta cut deal with billionaire guilty in sex abuse case. Mark Fisher's reportage of March 22nd, 2017. And I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's all laid out right there. While Acosta's nomination is pending, and as other Twitter folk responded to Penny, they knew it was in the papers. They all knew, they just didn't care. Republicans were going to approve of Donald Trump's nominee no matter what, and believe me, Ben Sass didn't give a good goddamn one way or the other, and probably still doesn't. So, what's the difference? I wouldn't cheer too loudly, I suppose. All right, so we have that on the record, and I guess that's a good thing. Doesn't really help me get over the annoyance factor there, but okay, at least we've talked about it. Other things worth discussing. Well, we won't get to all of this, but how about this one? The reporting of the ProPublica people have been on the case, as always, for quite a while, and they have run a report. I guess it's a series, and it's probably continuing, and the coverage itself is getting coverage, but they are back on the story of the, as they put it, shadow rulers of the Veterans Affairs, or Veterans Administration. Veterans Affairs is the committee. Veterans Administration is the agency. VA shadow rulers had sway over contracting and budgeting. Isaac Arnsdorf has put together a rather lengthy piece here, and I imagine there's even more pieces to it. But you remember the original story that Trump pals and Mar-a-Lago members, let me get back up to the top of the article so we can get the full names here. Marvel Entertainment Chairman Ike Perlmutter, West Palm Beach physician Bruce Moskowitz, and lawyer Mark Sherman, part of the president's inner circle at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, are the shadow secretaries, essentially, of the VA. And Trump has essentially given them carte blanche to run the place from Florida. And although the control of the agency remains nominally in the hands of the actual secretary, all it is he's a pass-through. These guys call the shots, essentially, and the secretary knows his place in all this and knows that President Trump, as they like to call him there, will take their side in any of these disputes. And now it turns out, I guess, to put things a little more succinctly, and depending on, once again, the Hill's distillation of the subject, they'll give you their headline so you can figure out exactly what's going on, even if we don't get into the nitty-gritty details of things. Slow computer here, but I'll give you the headline. Mar-a-Lago trio reviewed confidential $10 billion VA contract before its release, according to a report. And more to the point, it is an issue of their intervention in the implementation of this $10 billion contract that just happens to have essentially mandated that an iPhone, or I guess a smartphone app developed by Dr. Moskowitz becomes the de facto standard for implementing some of the new electronic medical records rules that they want to see adopted at the VA. It just they want it to be done in such a way that Dr. Moskowitz gets paid an extraordinary amount of money. Isn't that surprising? Here's the way they put it. 3 Mar-a-Lago Club members friendly with President Trump were reportedly given access to review a $10 billion government contract to overhaul electronic health records for veterans, even though they had no prior experience in the field. We learned all about that from ProPublica's first round of reporting. They're just not, there's no reason why they should be administering this, even without the conflict of interest. But to have that conflict of interest on top of things just makes it stink that much more. Records obtained by ProPublica show the men editing the budget and being placed on the executive committee to review this new proposal. Emails also show Moskowitz negotiating to get the VA and Apple to use a cell phone application he developed. The findings from ProPublica come months after the publication discovered the Mar-a-Lago trio were shaping policy at the VA. The men reportedly spoke with VA officials daily and inquired about new programs, including the deal with Apple. A liberal veterans group filed a lawsuit in federal court in August to attempt to block the men from shaping policy at the VA. All 3 men declined to comment to ProPublica, as did the White House. And of course, as you know in the background, the VA has been fraught with turnover over the past year following Trump's firing of former Secretary David Shulkin in March. The new VA Secretary, Robert Willeke, was confirmed by the Senate in July. So I imagine as this scandal develops and we learn more and more about how much money they're stealing, Ben Sasse will say he's gravely disappointed in all this. Susan Collins will express her being troubled, her continuing consternation, and Republicans will pat themselves on the back for calling for the resignation, and that will be the end of that. We'll read all about it on the show, I'm sure, but other than that, I don't expect any serious action on, unless, of course, the Manafort / Flynn / everybody else, Roger Stone, etc., stories finally engulf everyone at the White House and they clean the whole place out. But not holding my breath on that one either. Let's see. As we wait around here and keep the door open for Joan, I can throw out a couple other topics, see whether she wants to comment on any of these as well. We got time at least to throw out an interesting headline from Dana Milbank, who, I rarely care to quote Dana Milbank on this, but I enjoyed the headline. The Republicans' post-midterm strategy, thievery, an actual word that I had been using in tweets about the subject and in our own discussion of it yesterday. So I was pleased to see that get picked up. And interesting note in the first couple paragraphs of the piece here. After the Republican Party's losses in 2012, GOP elders, undertook an autopsy to discover the cause. Remember that term, the autopsy? This year, Republicans have opted instead for a good embalming. After a midterm drubbing that cost Republicans about 40 House seats, the best Democratic performance since the Watergate era, there has been, as the New York Times' Jonathan Martin put it, little self-examination among Republicans, nor any effort by leaders to confront why the party's once loyal base of suburban supporters abandoned it. And that's just part of what Milbank is covering here. He's talking also about the efforts in Wisconsin and Michigan and elsewhere to simply entrench themselves in power despite the fact that they lost. They used to say, of course, elections had consequences, yada, yada, and blah, blah, blah. But now they don't. So, or the elections have consequences, and the consequences of the election are we try to undo the consequences and prevent them from taking hold. That's, I guess, the new Republican motto in these things. Besides, the greatest adherent of, or I guess the greatest advocate for the elections have consequences baloney was John McCain, and he's dead, so they don't even need him anymore. Okay, there's that. Of other things of interest here include, let's see, a couple more interesting takes on the Republican war on democracy. True. Here's the note from The Hill about Hoyer saying that Dems won't seat Harris, at least until North Carolina figures out what's going on. I don't know whether he's dead set against Harris under all circumstances. I doubt it, but I am, and that's the way I would have put it. Let's see. A couple other items that we could perhaps save for another day. You know what? While we have it here, we'll head back over to a Daily Kos piece by Tim Lang, Meteor Blades, speaking as we were earlier of the situation in Saudi Arabia. Back to a topic that will perhaps tie together both the Saudi Arabia story and the Michael Flynn story a little bit, if you think about it just right. Was the Times kidding when it asked if the Saudis could be trusted not to build a nuclear bomb? We didn't get to this story, nor did we get originally to Meteor Blades' coverage of it, but now's a good time. On Thanksgiving, a story by David E. Sanger and William J. Broad in the New York Times was titled, "Saudis Want a U.S. Nuclear Deal. Can they be trusted not to build a bomb?" They can't be trusted with anything, but not to build a bomb, I really doubt it. Anyway, you remember a while back we discussed, this is how that ties to Michael Flynn. One of Michael Flynn's abiding interests in becoming National Security Advisor was the engineering of a weird nuclear power generation deal with the Saudis, wherein, variously, the Saudis could buy nuclear power plants manufactured by an American concern, but they would be buying sort of like prepackaged fuel that was manufactured in the United States in facilities that, for whatever reason, were co-located with some of our most important military installations, but that somehow they would own them, but we would be responsible maybe sort of kind of for security. It was a very weird and convoluted deal, as opposed to the Saudis saying we'll put our own resources into training nuclear scientists and our own resources into the construction of nuclear power plants and power the nation on something other than our own supply of oil. That was supposed to be a big reform that MBS was way into. But now, of course, we found out he's a brutal dictator, wacko, and paranoid murderer. And do you hand that kind of person the building blocks, potentially, of a nuclear weapon? So I guess you do. But you question yourself, can Saudi Arabia be trusted not to build a bomb? Well, the two veteran reporters, Meteor Blades continues, noted that before intelligence agencies concluded that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had ordered the murder of a journalist, and you know who, Jamal Khashoggi, they were trying to figure out whether he was seeking to provide his kingdom with the capability to build its own nuclear weapons. Part of the reason for the interest was that bin Salman has been negotiating with the United States to buy designs for nuclear power plants worth as much as $80 billion. And Jared Kushner has been doing a lot of that negotiating now that Mike Flynn is out of the picture. But there is a hitch, apparently, report the Times folks. Saudi Arabia insists on producing its own nuclear fuel, even though it could buy it more cheaply abroad, according to American and Saudi officials familiar with the negotiations. That raised concerns in Washington that the Saudis could divert their fuel into a covert weapons project, exactly what the United States and its allies feared Iran was doing before it reached the 2015 nuclear accord, which President Trump has since abandoned. Prince Mohammed set off alarms when he declared earlier this year in the midst of the negotiation that if Iran, Saudi Arabia's fiercest rival, developed a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible. His negotiators stirred more worries by telling the Trump administration that Saudi Arabia would refuse to sign an agreement that would allow United Nations inspectors to look anywhere in the country for signs that the Saudis might be working on a bomb. American officials said, and that's usually a bottom line absolute must-have in any nuclear deal to which the United States is a party. Non-proliferation has to be verifiable and guaranteed. But the Saudis say, we would rather not have that. And, this administration may just say, that'd be okay, especially if it's worth $80 billion, especially if I get to steal some of that $80 billion. Well, the murder and dismemberment of Khashoggi spurred Democratic Representative Brad Sherman of California, senior member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, to answer the question acidly. A country that can't be trusted with a bone saw shouldn't be trusted with nuclear weapons. I think that's pretty succinct. Wraps it up for now. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let us then continue with the piece we were reading from Meteor Blades. I'll remind you of the title. Was the Times, the New York Times, kidding when it asked if the Saudis could be trusted not to build a nuclear bomb? I guess the answer is they weren't kidding, but we wish they were. How about that? So, Brad Sherman, Congressman of California, I think summed things up nicely. A country that can't be trusted with a bone saw shouldn't be trusted with nuclear weapons. That's just a pretty good reason. Like if they ever, I guess if they really wanted to one day end up with at least this nuclear deal, if they really wanted peaceful application of nuclear power, I would think in a normal American administration that a prerequisite for that now would be the exclusion of Mohammed bin Salman from the line of succession. I don't know if that would necessarily keep him out of power. It's a kind of a murky picture how power, where power resides there, but at the very least they ought to keep him out of the official line of succession. And it would be a simple thing to do. Take your pick of 150 other princes. Or, for that matter, again, take your pick of any of the two other people who have held the title of Crown Prince under the reign of King Salman before MBS. I mean, it's not like he's just born to it and he's been the Crown Prince since time immemorial. It's a relatively new thing. I assume that means you can take it away from him pretty easily, too. So, a country that can't be trusted with a bone saw shouldn't be trusted with nuclear weapons. And Meteor Blades continues here. Indeed, the murder has roused even some of the kingdom's usual supporters in Congress to threaten to cut off support for the vicious Saudi intervention in the Yemeni civil war. And any nuclear arrangement will presumably have to overcome more than the usual timid opposition to Washington's coziness with Riyadh. Another potential obstacle to any nuclear arrangement seems likely to be the findings of the Trump-Russia investigation, which various commentators have reported will be devastating for Donald Trump and members of his family. So let's get to it already. Thus, for the moment, it would seem the question in that headline probably is moot, which is a good thing, since providing the Saudi autocracy nuclear capability without restrictions or inspections is a clear violation of Article 3 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Not that this matters to Trump. After all, he hates treaties and withdraws from them left and right. Since he doesn't think much of most international agreements and frequently has declared he can make better ones, it's a bit of a surprise that he hasn't already announced that the United States is pulling out of the 50-year-old non-proliferation treaty, but then maybe he's never heard of it. Intelligence Agency veteran Paul R. Pillar had an especially bullseye response last week to the Times piece at Loblog. That's what it's called. At Loblog, Lobelog. Am I reading that right? Okay. He noted that some of what the Saudis seek to jettison in any nuclear deal, and which the Trump regime has been negotiating via Energy Secretary Rick Perry, are the very things included in the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. All of the stuff that made proponents of the deal believe that it would prevent weapons development in Iran, all of the safeguards. Now, granted, Republicans and opponents of the deal never believed that they would be enforced or enforced properly, but there were safeguards in there that were supposed to prevent the Iranians from developing weapons, and they'll just take that out. It's not going to be a part of any nuclear agreement that the Trump types are pursuing, I guess. That multilateral agreement, the Iranian agreement, of course, is the one Trump bailed from, despite the fact that Tehran has complied with every provision, according to repeated inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And some quotes here on, I don't know, does it come from the Bullseye response? Yes, at Loblog. Let's see. That's where the previous link is to. The Saudi regime has been making noises for several years about wanting to get whatever Iran gets, as if the JCPOA involved Iran getting something nuclear rather than having its nuclear program set back and restricted. Okay. JCPOA, obviously the acronym for the full name of the Iranian nuclear agreement. So, a reasonable U.S. response to such talk would be to say, all right, you can have an agreement with terms that match what is in the JCPOA. This would mean, besides strict limits on the amount and level of uranium enrichment, a total ban on domestic reprocessing of spent reactor fuel. So Riyadh would have to discard its dreams of using reactors to make its own nuclear fuel. It would mean that the same sort of far-reaching inspections arrangement to which Iran is subject, including challenge inspections of non-declared facilities, and it would mean no assistance from the United States in the form of reactor sales or other help in developing a nuclear program. Saudi Arabia would not get anything nuclear from the United States because under the JCPOA, Iran didn't get anything nuclear from the United States either. In addition, to match Iran's experience, Saudi Arabia would be subject to punishing economic sanctions until and unless it agreed to all of these terms. Or, to be totally consistent with the Trump administration's policy toward Iran, Saudi Arabia would be subject to punishing economic sanctions even if it did agree to and observe those terms. But this is merely one of the most blatant ways in which the administration's policies toward the region have been inconsistent and hypocritical. The last thing the Middle East needs, Meteor Blades concludes, or that the world needs, is another nation with nuclear weapons capability. Any White House effort now or in the future to make that a possibility should be pulverized by Congress. And I guess we'll have to wait for the next Congress to even half pulverize that. But at least we've got a shot at it going forward beginning in January. Pulverizing it in the House only to have it, I suppose, stall in the Senate. But you can still do resolutions. Not that that would be any great help to you. All right. Let's see. Looks like a computer running awfully slow again this morning, which is too bad. And maybe it has to do with having 35,000 tabs open. But, well, rather than go back to Pocket, maybe I should go through some of these tabs and see what I've left for myself in terms of breadcrumbs for other stories to cover this morning. Oh, boy, it's really crawling now. Might have to limp through some of this. I wonder if we can open Pocket on another. Perhaps we open Pocket on a different computer. That would move faster, although that will make controlling the sound effects and operations of the show that much more difficult. I guess it's beginning to look like we won't have Joan for much, if at all, of today's show. It must be an awfully busy day there in Front Page World, and I probably should keep one eye on it, and then I would know exactly what was going on. But the number of screens on which I can keep an eye on things has been reduced by half, thanks to the slow functioning of the laptop this morning. All right. Let's see. I guess at this point, probably all the discussion this morning there's so much on Michael Flynn, but so much of that report is redacted. I'm worried about diving into one of the reports and only to find out that it eats up the rest of the show and we don't learn anything. But maybe we'll try this one, as NYC Southpaw has dived into this one. Lupe Lupin, the actual real-life name here, and Hunter Walker combining for a Yahoo News piece. Mueller says Michael Flynn provided substantial assistance to the Russia probe and a mysterious separate criminal investigation. And he usually has pretty good insight or pretty good guesses about what that might be in most of these cases, so that's why I chose to go with this Yahoo News piece. A memo filed in federal court for the District of Columbia on Tuesday confirmed that President Trump's former top national security advisor, Michael Flynn, has been cooperating extensively with the Mueller investigation. And you know what that's an investigation of. We'll skip that this time. The document also revealed that Mueller is working on a separate criminal investigation, but it didn't divulge any details about the focus of that probe. The memo was a sentencing recommendation for Flynn that summarized his misconduct and subsequent work with prosecutors. It said Flynn had provided substantial assistance to Mueller's team since pleading guilty to one count of making false statements to the FBI in November of 2017. In the document, Mueller recommended that Flynn, due to his cooperation, receive the low end of the 0 to 6 month sentence that could have come with his crime. So presumably the low end of that is 0. Given the defendant's substantial assistance and other considerations set forth below, a sentence at the low end of the guideline range, including a sentence that does not impose a term of incarceration, is appropriate and warranted, Mueller wrote. The 7-page sentencing memo was accompanied by a heavily redacted 6-page addendum detailing the significance and usefulness of Flynn's assistance. Mueller had requested that the addendum be partially sealed because it contained what he described as sensitive information about ongoing investigations. Most of the blacked-out portions of the addendum dealt with a criminal investigation that the document distinguished from the special counsel's principal probe into coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign. While Mueller's documents provided almost no detail about this mysterious investigation, they confirmed it was separate from the Russia probe and that it is continuing. It is not clear from the documents whether the second investigation involves Trump. The addendum also included indications that the other probe might involve prosecutors outside of Mueller's office. He wrote that as part of his cooperation, Flynn participated in 19 interviews with the special counsel or attorneys from other Department of Justice offices. In addition to confirming the separate criminal investigation, one section of the addendum noted that Flynn has, quote, assisted with several ongoing investigations, tantalizingly indicated that there may be a third probe. The special counsel's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment about how many investigations Flynn has assisted with. Details of Flynn's cooperation had been hotly anticipated by close observers to the Mueller investigation. Since Flynn's guilty plea 1 year ago, he has not appeared as a witness in any public proceeding related to the special counsel's office, and no information clearly derived from his cooperation surfaced in any court documents filed by the special counsel, apart from status updates postponing his sentencing. Consequently, Tuesday night's filing represented the first substantial update to Flynn's part in the full investigation, or in the investigation for a full year. In addition, the amount of disclosure provided by Flynn's sentencing memo was a key signal to the status of Mueller's investigation overall. A highly detailed picture of Flynn's cooperation could have indicated that Mueller had few matters left that he wished to keep secret, and the investigation was winding down, as many expected. However, the heavy redactions in the document appear to indicate Mueller is continuing to work on significant matters not currently known to the public. The documents filed on Tuesday also provide some hints of where Mueller's Russia probe is focusing. It said Flynn had provided first-hand information about the content and context of interactions between Trump's presidential transition team and Russian government officials. As an example, Mueller cited information Flynn provided prosecutors about his own contacts with Russia. Much of this portion of the document was heavily redacted, however. A U.S. intelligence community assessment concluded Russia intervened in the election, as you know. Trump, of course, blah, 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 witch hunt, no collusion. White House and Trump's legal team didn't respond to requests for comment about the Flynn memo. The full statements Flynn pleaded guilty to making to the FBI occurred in an interview he had with agents in January of 2017, the month Trump took office. At the time, Flynn was serving as the president's national security advisor. And in that interview, Flynn falsely denied asking Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak not to respond to President Barack Obama's sanctions against the Kremlin for the election interference. Flynn was fired from the Trump administration in February of 2017 after it was discovered he also lied about his contacts with Kislyak to Vice President Mike Pence. Greg was on that earlier. Mueller's memo also revealed that Flynn admitted to misrepresenting his lobbying work on behalf of the Turkish government. He's not charged for that crime. And of course, hearkening back to his lock her up chants at the Republican National Convention. Okay. Well, nothing new, but a good summary and leaving things in place for tomorrow and for future developments in that case. How about this? Something I put away from, again, the New York Times, which sometimes is on it and sometimes just isn't. But we'll just share this in terms of being a helpful reiteration of a theme that we have hit upon a few times here on the show. And I guess it amounts to patting ourselves on the back for doing a good job with it. And here's the title: American capitalism isn't working. Did you know that? Not so long ago, corporate leaders understood they had a stake, and that means something, a stake in the country's prosperity. David Leonhardt wrote this piece, and it came out on Sunday, in the Sunday New York Times, for crying out loud. Features prominently a photo of Elizabeth Warren speaking to folks at American University on Thursday of last week. Here's the deal and how David sets this whole thing up. The October 1944 edition of Fortune magazine carried an article by a corporate executive that makes for amazing reading today. It was written by William B. Benton, a co-founder of the Benton and Bowles ad agency, and an editor's note explained that Benton was speaking not just for himself, which is what usually they put in these things, but on behalf of a major corporate lobbying group. The article then laid out a vision for America's prosperity after World War II. At the time, almost nobody took post-war prosperity for granted. This was, of course, 1944. The world had just endured 15 years of depression and war. Many Americans were worried that the end of wartime production, combined with the return of job-seeking soldiers, would plunge the economy into a new slump. Today, victory is our purpose. Remember, again, it's October of 1944. Victory is our purpose, Benton wrote. Tomorrow, our goal will be jobs, peacetime production, high living standards, and opportunity. Sounds good. That goal, he wrote, depended on American businesses accepting, quote, necessary and appropriate government regulation, unquote, as well as labor unions. It depended on companies not earning their profits, quote, at the expense of the welfare of the community, unquote. It depended on rising wages. These leftist-sounding ideas weren't based on altruism. The Great Depression and the rise of European fascism had scared American executives. Many had come to believe that unrestrained capitalism was dangerous to everyone. The headline on Benton's article was, "The Economics of a Free Society." In the years that followed, corporate America largely followed this prescription. Not everyone did, of course, and management and labor still had bitter disputes, but most executives behaved as if they cared about their workers and communities. CEOs accepted pay packages that today look like a pittance. Middle-class incomes rose faster in the 1950s and 1960s than incomes at the top. Imagine that, declining income inequality. And the economy and American business boomed during this period, just as Benton and his fellow chieftains had predicted. Wow. Things began to change in the 1970s. Facing more global competition and higher prices, and with Great Depression memories fading, executives became more aggressive. They decided, and how did they decide this, that their sole mission was maximizing shareholder value. Now you remember that we've been on this turf before, right? They decided, and of course business schools taught them, that their sole mission was maximizing shareholder value. They fought for deregulation, reduced taxes, union-free workplaces, lower wages, and much, much higher pay for themselves. They justified it all with promises of a wonderful new economic boom. That boom never arrived. I don't know. I think I even could dispute that. It's just it never arrived for the rest of us. It arrived for them in spades. But okay, fine. Even when economic growth has been decent, as it is now, most of the bounty has flowed to the top. Median weekly earnings have grown a miserly 0.1% a year since 1979. The typical American family today has a lower net worth than the typical family did 20 years ago. Life expectancy, shockingly, has fallen in this decade. The great stagnation of living standards is a defining problem of our time. Most families do not enjoy the rapidly rising level of living that Benton called for. Understandably, many Americans are anxious and angry. Oh, don't say they have economic anxiety, though. The solution will need to involve a return to higher taxes on the rich. But it's also worth thinking about pre-tax incomes, and specifically what goes on inside corporations. It's worth asking the question that Benton asked: what kind of corporate America does the rest of America need? Elizabeth Warren, and here we understand why her picture was focused on here, or was used as illustration. Elizabeth Warren, the Massachusetts senator, is now rolling out a platform for her almost certain presidential campaign, and it includes an answer to this question. It is a fascinating one because it differs from the usual Democratic agenda of progressive taxes and bigger social programs, which Warren also supports. Her idea is the most intriguing policy idea to come out of the early 2020 campaign. Warren wants an economy in which companies again invest in their workers and communities. Yet she doesn't believe it can happen organically as it did in the 1940s because financial markets will punish well-meaning executives who stop trying to maximize short-term profits. They can't go back, she told me recently. You have to do it with a rule. She has proposed a bill in the Senate, and Ben Ray Lujan, a top House Democrat, I guess we should be saying Lujan, a top House Democrat will soon offer it there, that would require corporate boards to take into account the interests of customers, employees, and communities. Stakeholders, of course, as you and I call them. To make sure that happens, 40% of a company's board seats would be elected by employees. Germany uses a version of this shared governance model, mostly successfully. Even in today's hyper-competitive economy, German corporations earn nice profits with a philosophy that looks more like William Benton's than Gordon Gekko's. How ironic, though, that the Germans have done better with our American post-war plan than we have. Is Warren's plan the best way to rein in corporate greed? I'm not yet sure. I want to see politicians and experts hash out her idea and others, much as they hashed out healthcare policy in the 2008 campaign. I would rather see them hash it out in a different setting, I would say. But I do know this. American capitalism isn't working right now. If Benton and his fellow post-war executives returned with the same ideas today, they would be branded as socialists. In truth, they were the capitalists who cared enough about the system to save it. The same goes for the new reformers. So an interesting approach to these things. And in the interest of brevity, I suppose, and focus, plenty left out, but luckily we've discussed this stuff before, and so we know what was missing, and we've discussed some of it in the past. One entry point into that discussion being, well, gee whiz, somehow in the 70s, they decided, CEOs, I guess, decided that this whole thing was wrong and they needed to maximize shareholder value. They were taught that, for the most part. And it's probably worth pointing out that, that comes out of, I guess, Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economics. And I guess probably also no coincidence that it was University of Chicago that developed the law and economics approach to legal activity. And in the legal realm, that was necessary for training lawyers and retraining judges in such a way that the legal arguments necessary to justify a migration to maximization of shareholder value versus stakeholder value was defensible in court. Mighty OCD, yes, also getting to another, I was thinking of sort of a different aspect of the legal strategy here. But yes, you're correct in mentioning the Powell memo. And that had a lot to do with it in a slightly different way, I guess. In order to get the business schools of America and everywhere, not just the business schools, to teach this idea that maximizing shareholder value was right and worthy and justifiable, there had to be an enormous effort at placing and funding the professors and the chairs of these departments to in order to support this shift. And there was an enormous effort by the members of the Philanthropy Roundtable to coordinate the efforts of, essentially the first multimillionaires and proto-billionaires of the era, to coordinate their money and give to American colleges and universities in numbers large enough to ensure that there would be business schools and economics programs and liberal arts programs that would teach this same concept. And then eventually, between retraining lawyers and litigating these cases and developing the School of Law and Economics and teaching almost everybody, not just business students, but all liberal arts students in passing, that this was a valid philosophy. And in fact, they would fake it and say that it had always been the case since time immemorial. That required an awful lot of money and coordination. And today, if you look around, you'll find that the adherents, I guess, to tie it to Mighty OCD's comment, the adherents to the Powell memo have endowed chairs and entire departments and professorships named after them, lecture series, et cetera, because they donated the money that underwrote the effort to change the way business and the law of business was taught in American universities, both undergraduate programs and graduate degrees, in particular in law schools. So it was a tremendous effort. It didn't just happen, and it wasn't just CEOs who decided that it needed to be that way. They were taught that way from the beginning, and as they replaced the old guard, they brought that idea with them. And to the extent that they had to defend themselves in court against the suits and entreaties of other sorts from other stakeholders who now found themselves cut out of their portion of corporate profits, they had to be able to convince judges that it was somehow economically most efficient to move the lion's share of the profits to shareholders in particular. And that demanded a real fallback on a kind of hyper-capitalism. But, even at its heart, originally, capitalism, even in the days here in 1944, capitalism was called capitalism because of the primacy of capital. And it just made sense in a system that put capital right in the name that, those who provide capital would get the lion's share of the benefits. And those who provided the labor, the other 50+% of how you turn capital into even more capital, would just be shunted aside. It's not laborism, it's capitalism, and it just seemed to work. Okay, well, we can explore that a little bit more, but now time for Justice Putnam to do the exploring, and unfortunately, my computer being as slow as it is, it might be difficult to get to his pre-prepared summary of what he has for you on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up
Radio,
right now
on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, hey, we can say on a related note that you may not have noticed, I didn't even know we were talking about it, that the stock market lost 799 points on a Trump tweet. As a matter of fact, I saw tweeted around that apparently 10 out of the top 20 biggest single-day losses in Dow Jones history come under the Trump regime. That and much more next with Justice.